Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for another in our series of online programs. My name is Patrice Weaver with the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust. The Commission is a secular, nonpartisan state agency that strives to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and promote public understanding of the history. Today, we're going to take a look at the life and work of the German theologian and pastor, Martin Niemöller. Martin Friedrich Gustav Emil Niemöller was born January 14, 1892 in Lippstadt, Germany. We remember him chiefly for a poem we have all read and heard in our study of the Holocaust. You know it as "Then They Came for Me." But the Reverend Pastor Niemöller was much more than a few often repeated lines. First, let me give you a little background. When I research a person, I like to look at their place of origin and find out about its history. As a cultural geography teacher, as well as a historian, I believe place has an influence on the person's character and development. Martin Niemöller was born in the city of Lippstadt, which is in the North Rhine-Westphalia region of Germany. Now, Lippstadt has a very interesting history. The town is situated on the Lippe River, making it a natural spot for trade as merchant ships traveled up and down the river into the interior of Central and Eastern Europe. Lippstadt was a member of the Hanseatic League for over 500 years. The Hanseatic League was a medieval, commercial, and defensive confederation of merchant guilds and market towns in Central and Northern Europe. The league stretched from the Netherlands in the west to Russia in the east, and from Estonia in the north to Krakow, Poland in the south. In the early 1520s, Catholic Augustinian monks studying at the University of Wittenberg brought Martin Luther's doctrine home with them. Thus, in 1524, Lutheran doctrines were preached in Lippstadt, and the town was one of the first to embrace Lutheranism officially. Although Jews were thought to have lived in Lippstadt from the middle of the 14th century, the first available record of a Jewish presence there is dated 1535. By 1933, there were between 115 and 126 Jews living in Lippstadt, and of these, none are known to have survived the Holocaust. I found this information on the website germansynagogues.com, which is really interesting. And it's one of those places where you can spend way too much time looking at stuff. This site is an archive and a memorial to destroyed German synagogues and communities. So during World War II, there was an armaments factory in Lippstadt, and in 1944, a women's sub-camp of Buchenwald was established there to provide slave labor for that factory. After the war, there was a displaced persons camp in Lippstadt. So very interesting. And if you look at this picture, you see that this photo was taken in 2012, and this is all that remains of the synagogue in Lippstadt, one partial wall. It's not even the whole thing. You can't really tell from this picture, but you can see where it was sort of plastered over on one side. So the picture on the left is the house where Martin Niemöller was born in 1892. Now, Niemöller was part of a very conservative religious family. His father was a Lutheran minister. Niemöller grew up in an era in which Germany was quickly rising in the world as a powerful international empire. As Germany strove for imperial glory, its Protestants readily supported their emperor Wilhelm II in his imperial mission. As a young man, Niemöller regularly heard it proclaimed that God had providentially chosen the German nation to be a vessel of divine salvation in the world. Readily adopting such ideas, Niemöller affirmed that the German cause of throne and altar were one and the same. Wanting to advance these twin causes, at the age of 18, Niemöller became a cadet in the expanding Imperial German Navy. And on the right side of this slide is a photo of Niemöller as a naval cadet in about 1910. After completing his studies, he joined the Imperial German Navy. And here we see a photo of Martin Niemöller as a Marine officer, Oberleutnant zur See. The rank of Oberleutnant would be equivalent to an American first lieutenant. During World War I, Niemöller was stationed on several submarines which attacked Allied shipping. By the end of the war, he had become commander of his own U-boat and was successful in sinking many Allied ships around the port of Marseille. As a result, Niemöller was awarded the Iron Cross First Class. And on the right, of course, we see a picture of Niemöller with his crew on the deck of their U-boat. I put a little circle around about Niemöller. It's not the greatest picture, but it's kind of interesting to see that, isn't it? Now, as the war came to an end in 1918, German socialists and communists led a revolution which overthrew the monarchy and established a republic that became known as the Weimar Republic after the city where it was founded. Interestingly, sailors in the Kaiser's Navy participated in a mutiny that was key to this popular victory. In this photo, we see sailors in the Kaiser's Navy participating in a demonstration in support of the revolution in the Baltic port city of Kiel. Now, Martin Niemöller could not have been more disapproving. He was so disgusted by the mass embrace of democracy and this failure of the Imperial Navy to support the Kaiser that he quit the Navy to retrain as a Lutheran minister. Although the Great War inspired a new wave of theological reflection throughout Europe, Niemöller's nationalism remained unshaken. Like so many of his countrymen, Niemöller believed in the stab in the back myth that says the German army's loss in the Great War was due entirely to the efforts of internal forces. Even as this theory took hold, there is no consensus about who was actually to blame for the loss of the war. The military accused the parliament, politicians, and the government. The Protestant clergy, which had been extremely nationalistic during the war, lamented the general moral decline and accused socialism, communism, trade unions, and sometimes the Jews for this betrayal. These posters were both produced in 1924 and illustrate the stab in the back myth. The black and white poster on the right shows Philipp Scheidemann, the head of the Social Democratic Party, and other leaders of the Weimar government. Here we see Scheidemann stabbing German soldiers in the back. The words down in the right-hand corner translate in English as, "Germans, remember." The poster on the left is from the German National People's Party. And if you have looked at the origins of Nazism and all, you know that the German National People's Party was a precursor of the Nazi Party. It shows a masked figure in red wearing a workman-style hat and clothing, again, stabbing a German soldier in the back. The text of this poster warns that revolutionary socialists and Jewish activists had broken the will of the German army, and that the Social Democratic Party would make slaves of the Germans to the Entente. And the Entente was the alliance between France and Great Britain. So while working on his new goal of becoming a Lutheran minister, Niemöller served as a commander in the reactionary Freikorps. The Freikorps was a proto-fascist paramilitary army known for street fighting and the outright murder of German leftists and communists. And this image is a recruitment poster for the Freikorps from 1918. Now in this photo, we see members of the Freikorps wearing old German army uniforms and armed with military weapons. Now notice something about this. If you look at what they're wearing and their helmets and everything, there are no insignia or on their uniforms or helmets. However, if you look closely at the center figure of this photo, you see one man wearing a ribbon on his jacket. That is his Iron Cross ribbon. That was part of the military uniform if you were awarded an Iron Cross. So here we have on the left a photo from the Spartacus uprising of 1919. The Spartacus League was part of a Marxist revolutionary movement that called for a government based on workers' councils, very similar and based upon and copying the Soviet system. Soviet is a council. The uprising was very small scale, had limited support, and consisted of the occupation of a few newspaper buildings and the construction of street barricades. The uprising was quickly crushed by the combined forces of the police and the Freikorps. The leaders of the Spartacus League, including Rosa Luxemburg, were murdered while in the custody of the Freikorps in January of 1919. One of the things, again, these rabbit holes that you go down when you do this research, Rosa Luxemburg is fascinating. She was one of the first women to ever earn a PhD. And she went to the University in Zurich, which I didn't know that before. So Niemöller had no problem with the with the Freikorps persecution of the communists, the socialists, and the Jews. During the elections of 1924 and 1932, Niemöller stated that he voted for the Nazi Party. He, like so many others, hoped that a strong and powerful leader might unify the German nation and restore it to greatness following its crushing defeat during the First World War. He celebrated Hitler and the Nazi Party's rise to power in 1933. It was only when the Nazis began to intrude on the autonomy of the Protestant churches in Germany that Niemöller spoke out. So Christian churches were in decline in Germany during the 1920s and the 1930s. This is partially due to the aftermath of World War I and the secular values of the Weimar period. There was a sharp drop in religious attendance during the Great Depression. Church rolls from 1932 in Germany show that 186,000 Germans stopped attending Christian churches that year. Despite that, the vast majority of Germans still identified as Christians, and according to the 1933 census, 52% consider themselves Protestant and 33% Catholic. Growing Nazi totalitarianism forced German churches to take a position on Hitler and his followers. Some Protestant churches were open in their support of the Nazi movement. Some Protestant leaders even pushed for the creation of a Reichskirche, a state church, loyal to Nazism and subordinate to the state. The Deutsche Christen, or the German Christian Party or group, was the largest branch of German Protestantism and the most supportive of a Reichskirche. Deutsche Christian leaders considered Hitler a visionary not unlike Martin Luther. Hitler, they believed, had the potential to transform and revive German Christianity. And remember, they were losing attendance in huge numbers. There was also a strong anti-Semitic strain within the Deutsche Christen. Some of its leaders urged the rejection of Jewish texts and the expulsion of Christian converts with Jewish heritage. The leader of the Deutsche Christen, Bishop Ludwig Müller, met with Hitler several times and promised the support of this church. In the photos on the upper left, we see Bishop Müller addressing a child with the swastika symbol on top of the cross on a podium. In the photo below, we see a group of SA troopers outside of a pro-Nazi church service in July of 1933. And the photo on the right shows Hitler greeting Reich Bishop Müller at a rally in Nuremberg. This was in September of 1934. So here we see some examples of the type of symbology that shows the connection between the church and the state in Germany at this time. The belt buckle was standard issue to all Army and Navy troops. The lapel pins would identify wearers as member of the Deutsche Christians. So in reaction to all of this that was going on with the Deutsche Christians and the Reichschurch talk, on September 11th, 1933, as a protest against interference in church affairs by the Nazi Party, Niemöller helped found the Pastors' Emergency League. The main issue was the so-called Aryan paragraph, which was a requirement that Protestant Christian churches expel all members of Jewish descent and force out clergy married to non-Aryans. The next year, the Pastors' Emergency League was reorganized at the Synod of Barmen. One of the outcomes of this synod was the founding of the Confessing Church. A position paper was written and published called the Barmen Declaration. Essentially, this declaration drew a line in the sand between Christianity and nationalism and addressed the errors made by the Deutsche Christians, according to the Confessing Church members. The main points were the denunciation of Aryan ideology and that Scripture and the Reformation confessions alone could determine church practice and teachings. And this is a direct line from Martin Luther. So that's exactly how they were organizing their church. The entire Barmen Declaration was smuggled out of Germany and was published in the London Times. And from there, it was distributed around the world. Now, what we're looking at in this slide on the right is a photo of the Confessing Church membership card. And on the left is the Barmen Declaration. It's interesting to note that on this membership card, the records state that more than 1/3 of Protestant clergy of Germany signed up in support of the Barmen Declaration. I was really surprised at that. So despite the Barmen Declaration and the founding of the Confessing Church, Niemöller's form of disobedience to the Nazis, while personally dangerous, was always deeply limited. He was primarily concerned with the independence and interests of the Protestant churches. As a political reactionary, he wasn't speaking out against the mass arrests and murder of German leftists. His silence on this subject speaks volumes. In his resistance, if it can be called that, to official anti-Semitism was so limited, it was limited to those of Jewish descent who had converted to Protestant Christianity. At the same time as he was objecting to the Aryan paragraph being forced on his church, Niemöller was still giving anti-Semitic sermons, repeating the old Christian trope that the Jews should be punished for the crucifixion of Christ. These ideas were straight from the writings of Martin Luther. Miller's public objections to the Nazification of the church and the worldwide audience he had gained through his leadership of the Confessing Church were enough to get him in serious trouble with the Nazis. As Hitler sought to synchronize all aspects of German life under his dictatorial rule, a process called Gleichschaltung, Niemöller's leadership in the Confessing Church was a thorn in his side. With the Confessing Church proving difficult to completely silence, the Nazis began intimidating Niemöller through tapping his phones, reading his mail, interrogations, and preaching bans. Finally, in 1937, the Nazis had enough. Hitler moved to stifle all dissent and ordered the Gestapo to arrest Niemöller for treasonable statements. Niemöller was imprisoned in solitary confinement for the next 7 months while awaiting trial. When the court system acquitted Niemöller of treason, mainly because of his record as a naval officer in the Great War, an enraged Hitler ordered the Gestapo to again seize and imprison him. This time, Niemöller was sent to Sachsenhausen. For the duration of the war, Niemöller remained Hitler's personal prisoner alongside other enemies of the Nazi state. Despite his imprisonment, Niemöller's love of the German nation and militaristic spirit endured. In 1939, when Germany began World War II, Niemöller petitioned to be released in order to serve in the German Navy. His petition was ignored. This photo shows a roll call in front of the camp gates at Sachsenhausen. Now, while Niemöller was being arrested, tried, and incarcerated, the world at large knew about his situation. This is a Time magazine cover from December of 1940. The article featuring Pastor Niemöller was called German Martyrs. Now, keep in mind, in the 40s, the Gallup poll found that 9 out of 10 American adults identified as Christian, and of that group, half were Protestant. You will recall the United States was not yet at war with Germany. The United States entered the war after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, a year after this magazine was published. And at that time, that's when Hitler declared war in the United States. So early in 1941, a man named Leo Stein, a German Jew, who had been imprisoned with Niemöller in Sachsenhausen, was able to obtain release on the condition that he immediately leave Germany. Stein made his way to the United States and embarked on a lecture tour. He told his audiences that Niemöller ministered to other inmates and shared his rations with Jewish prisoners who were given even less than political prisoners. In 1942, Stein published a book, I Was in Hell with Niemöller, about his experiences. Again, there was a lot of interest among the American public about the fate of Martin Niemöller. This newspaper clipping is from the Allentown, Pennsylvania Morning Call, and it's advertising a lecture that Dr. Stein was going to give in Allentown, and this is dated March 9th, 1943. So during his years in the camps, first in Sachsenhausen and then after 1941 in Dachau, Niemöller experienced great hardships and privations. As a more famous prisoner, he also received marginally better treatment. Apparently, some SS officers wished to keep him alive to use as a possible bargaining tool, just in case. In April of 1945, he was transferred away from the advancing Allied armies to the Tyrol in Austria with other prominent prisoners. The prisoners were liberated by the US Fifth Army on May 5th, 1945. Now, in 1947, in light of his past support for the Nazi regime, the Allies decided not to recognize Niemöller as an official victim of the Nazis. So what exactly is Martin Niemöller's legacy? Was he a victim, a hero, both, or neither? Unlike many in post-war Europe, Niemöller never disputed his own complicity with fascism. Seeking to lead the church in repentance and renewal, he authored the Stuttgart Declaration of Guilt in October of 1945. The declaration confessed Germany's collective guilt in not opposing Hitler and the war effort. Niemöller then embarked upon a trip of reconciliation to the United States, modeling in the process the transnational ecumenism that he hoped would defeat German nationalism. And you can see I put just a section, one paragraph of the Stuttgart Declaration up here in English, so you can read that. However, unsurprisingly, not all Germans shared his view of their collective guilt. The declaration was viewed by many as a further capitulation to the Allies and a betrayal of German interests. Others drew comparison to the war guilt clause of the Versailles Treaty. Now, I found these great books by historian Dr. Matthew Hakanos, a professor of modern European history at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. He's researched and written extensively on this subject for the last couple of decades, and he has identified 3 basic reasons that Germans were reluctant to confess wrongdoings. First, many Germans had in fact supported the Nazis and were in fact unrepentant. Their racist and nationalist mentality was intact, perhaps even heightened by the defeat, which triggered feelings of anger and resentment. Secondly, The nature and extent of the Nazi barbarities was difficult to comprehend, even for some of those who participated in them. Bystanders were reluctant to take responsibility for a campaign that was, in both quantitative and moral terms, nearly incomprehensible. Thirdly, Germans were suffering also, and they naturally gave priority to their own sufferings. So despite opposition by some Germans to accepting guilt, Niemöller remained keen to atone for his past and promote peace and reconciliation. He believed that Germans had to accept responsibility for the Holocaust. In a sermon in 1946, he stated, "We must openly declare that we are not innocent of the Nazi murders, of the murder of German communists, Poles, Jews, and the people in German-occupied countries. No doubt others made mistakes too, but the wave of crime started here, and here it reached its highest peak." A year later, he wrote one of the most famous poems of the era. Niemöller came to the painful realization that his love of nation had overpowered his love of God and neighbor. When he had defended the German church and nation, he had overlooked and failed to defend the least of these, which is a major tenet of Christianity. He confessed his lack of solidarity with the Jews and other Nazi enemies, those he had deemed anti-Christian and anti-German, had only furthered Hitler's ruthless dictatorship. Such realizations profoundly impacted Niemöller. For the rest of his life, he resolved to speak out for those oppressed and persecuted in the world, regardless of their race, religion, or politics. And he acknowledged his own anti-Semitism. This is a quote from the biography of Niemöller by James Bentley, and it's actually a line from a letter that he wrote to another author that Bentley included in his biography. In it, he states, "I believe that from 1933, I truly represented the Lutheran Christian outlook on the Jewish question, as I revealed before the court, but I have returned home after 8 years imprisonment as a completely different person." Now, when the threat of military and possibly nuclear conflict rose during the Cold War, Niemöller practiced a radical discipleship as one of the most outspoken supporters of Christian pacifism and nuclear disarmament. He himself remarked on how strongly he changed his views during his lifetime. He said, "I started my political career as an ultra-conservative who wanted the Kaiser to come back. And now I am a revolutionary. I really mean that. If I live to be 100, I shall maybe be an anarchist." So to conclude, I think Niemöller's heroism ultimately lay not so much in his courageous but very limited stand against Hitler, but in his genuine willingness to repent and make amends. He spent the last 40 years of his life working toward peace, understanding, and reconciliation.